Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can shake an entire room. In a quiet small-town cafe, a young waitress noticed something most people would have ignored: a tired service dog lying beside an older man's chair. The man's plate held nothing but a piece of toast and coffee. His dog, disciplined and silent, hadn't touched a thing. What she didn't know was that the man was a decorated war veteran, and that the dog had saved more lives than anyone in that diner could imagine. Ignoring her manager's warnings, she slipped the dog a plate of eggs and bacon. But instead of gratitude from the other customers, she got mockery. Two men at the counter laughed loud enough for the whole room to hear, questioning the veteran's worth, even insulting his loyal companion. What happened next silenced them instantly. Because within minutes, the bell above the door jingled, and 6 Marines in full-dress blues walked in. They recognized the veteran immediately, and without hesitation, they formed a silent wall around the waitress's table. The air shifted, the mockery died, and a powerful message about respect, service, and loyalty unfolded before everyone's eyes. This isn't just a story about a dog or even a veteran. It's about what happens when honor walks into the room, and the people who choose to stand with it. Stay with me until the end, because what happened after that morning would ripple through the whole town and might just change the way you see strangers forever. The morning rush at Mel's Diner was never much of a rush at all. A few old farmers in ball caps, a trucker or two, maybe a pair of high school kids sharing a plate of pancakes before the bell. But that Wednesday morning, the air felt heavier. The kind of heaviness that doesn't come from weather, but from the way people carry themselves inside a room. Casey noticed it the moment she clocked in. She was 23, new to this town, still learning the rhythms of its people. Mel's had been her safe place, a little island where she could work hard, save money, and keep her head down. But she had a soft spot, a weakness her grandmother used to call it. Casey couldn't stand to see someone, or something, go hungry. That's why she saw him before anyone else did. An older man, maybe late 60s, sat in the corner booth near the window. His posture was too straight for his age, the way men carry themselves when the military has carved it into their bones. He wore a faded ball cap with the words Vietnam Veteran stitched in gold thread, though the edges were frayed like it had been through decades of weather. Beside him, lying perfectly still, was a large German shepherd, the kind you could tell had been trained to obey without a word. The dog's harnessed red service animal. Casey had seen a few service dogs before, but this one, it wasn't just obedience, it was watchfulness. Even as it rested, its eyes stayed fixed on the door, the corners, the people. The man's plate held nothing but a single piece of toast and a small coffee. No eggs, no bacon. Casey glanced at the menu. It wasn't that he'd forgotten to order, it was that he couldn't. Toast and coffee cost just over $3. She'd seen that choice before, when she came to his table. He smiled politely, the kind of smile that's more habit than joy. "Morning," she said softly. "Anything else I can get for you today?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am, this is plenty." His voice had that gravelly tone of someone who'd seen too many early mornings in cold places. Casey nodded, but her eyes fell on the dog. Its ribs were just visible under its thick coat. "Beautiful dog," she said. "His name's Ranger." The veteran replied, "Been with me since my last deployment. Saved my life more times than I can count." Casey smiled. "Bet he's earned more than just watching you eat toast." The man chuckled faintly, but there was a shadow in his expression. "He eats later." Casey knew that tone, the one people use when they're hiding the truth to keep their dignity. She hesitated only a second before deciding. Back in the kitchen, she slipped a small plate under the heat lamp, scrambled eggs and a slice of bacon, chopped into bite-sized pieces. She slid it toward the pickup counter like it was just another order. Her manager, Todd, caught her. Todd wasn't a bad guy, but he ran the place with the kind of tightness that comes from barely breaking even. "Casey," he said, lowering his voice, "that for table 5. "It's for the dog," she replied simply. Todd frowned. "We're not running a charity. You can't just—" "I'll cover it from my tips," she said quickly. "That's not the point. Customers see you feeding animals at tables. They'll—" But she was already moving, the plate balanced on her hand, a small smile on her lips. She knelt by the veteran's table. "For Ranger," she said quietly, "the dog's." Ears perked up, and the veteran's eyes widened just a fraction. "You didn't have to. I wanted to." Casey interrupted gently. "On the house, The dog ate slowly, with the kind of discipline only military training can teach. Each bite deliberate. The veteran didn't touch his toast again until Ranger had finished. That's when the laughter started. Two men at the counter, locals Casey had seen before, exchanged smirks. One of them, a broad-shouldered guy in a dirty work jacket, spoke just loud enough for the room to hear. "Look at that. Girl's feeding the dog while the man eats crumbs. Guess we know where her priorities are." The other chimed in. "Bet. The mud eats better than half the people in here." Casey felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she forced herself to keep her back straight as she cleared another table. The veteran kept his gaze down, pretending not to hear, but she saw the way his hand paused on his coffee cup. "You ask me," the first man said louder. "Folks like that get too much sympathy, probably milking it for free meals." Casey turned, her voice steady. "He's a veteran, and that dog is his partner." The second man laughed. "Yeah, sure, partner. More like a prop to get petty." The diner went quiet in the way small town rooms do when someone crosses a line. But before Casey could respond, the bell over the door jingled. A group of 6 walked in, all wearing the unmistakable dress blues of the United States Marine Corps. The sound of their boots on the tile was sharp, deliberate. The leader, a tall captain with a chest full of medals, scanned the room. His eyes locked on the veteran in the corner, and in that instant, his expression changed from formality to recognition. Without a word, the Marines moved in unison, walking straight to Casey's table. The captain stopped in front of her. "Ma'am," he said with quiet respect, "is this your table?" Casey blinked. Yes, sir." He turned to his men. "Form up." The Marines surrounded her table, standing like a wall of silent authority. The captain faced the veteran. "Sir, we didn't know you were here. It's an honor." The old man looked up slowly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Good to see you boys." The men at the counter stopped laughing. Casey didn't yet know it, but the next few minutes would turn that little cafe into a lesson the whole town would remember. The room had gone still, the kind of stillness that made the hum of the coffee machine sound loud. Casey could feel every set of eyes in the diner fixed on the men in uniform. The captain stepped closer to the veteran's booth. His voice softened, but his tone carried weight. "Sir, if I may, we were stationed together once, weren't we? Fallujah." The veteran chuckled, a low, tired sound. "That's right. I was the one yelling at you to keep your head down." A ripple of knowing smiles passed through the Marines. The captain turned to his men. "This man," he said firmly, "is Sergeant First Class Daniel Holt, Silver Star to Purple Hearts. If you're here enjoying your breakfast in peace this morning, it's partly because he's still walking this earth." Gasps and murmurs whispered across the cafe. Casey felt her chest tighten. Sergeant Holt. She'd just seen him as a quiet old man with a loyal dog, but now she pictured him in dusty armor, boots sinking into the dessert, a rifle at the ready, the 2 men at the counter. The mockers shifted uncomfortably. The first one looked down at his half-eaten omelet. The second tried to sip his coffee, but his hands trembled just enough for Casey to notice. The captain didn't even glance at them yet. Instead, he looked at Casey. "Ma'am, I heard you fed Ranger here. You should know. That's not just a dog. That's a Marine, too." Casey tilted her head. "A Marine." The captain nodded. "That German shepherd pulled Sergeant Holt out of an ambush in Helmand Province. Carried messages under fire. Detected IEDs before anyone else saw them. Ranger's got more confirmed saves than most humans. No." Ranger, sensing the attention, sat up straighter, his eyes flicking between the Marines and the door. "Most of us wouldn't be standing here if not for these 2. The captain continued, his voice deepening. "And in my unit, when someone takes care of one of us, they take care of all of us." The Marines didn't need further instruction. 2 of them stepped forward and placed crisp bills on the table, enough to cover Sergeant Holt's meal, the dog's food, and then some. Another Marine removed his white gloves and reached down to scratch Ranger's head finally. The captain turned toward the men at the counter. His boots clicked sharply on the tile as he approached. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Authority radiated from him like heat from asphalt in July. "You too," he said, his gaze locking onto them. "Did I hear you right a few minutes ago?" The first man stammered. We were just talking. Didn't mean anything by it." "Really?" the captain asked, tilting his head. "Because I heard you mocking a man who spent more nights under fire than you've probably spent at a steady job. And I heard you mocking his service dog, who saved more lives than you'll ever know. The second man tried to chuckle, but it came out hollow. We were just joking. The captain stepped closer, his voice quiet, but edged. A joke is when everyone's laughing. When you humiliate someone for doing the right thing, that's not a joke, that's cowardice. The diner was silent. Even Todd, the manager, had frozen in place, a coffee pot cooling in his hand. The captain didn't wait for a reply. He turned back to Sergeant Holt. Sir, with your permission, we'd like to join you for breakfast. The veteran smiled faintly. I'd be honored. The Marines pulled chairs from nearby tables, their movements sharp but respectful. Casey, still processing what she'd just witnessed, grabbed a fresh pot of coffee and started refilling cups. As she leaned toward Sergeant Holt, he glanced up at her. You didn't have to do what you did, he said softly, but you did it anyway. That means more than you think. Casey swallowed the lump in her throat. It was the right thing. The captain, overhearing, added, that's exactly how Marines think, man. You see a need, you act. No hesitation. Todd finally stepped forward, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, Casey, I might have been a little hard on you earlier. A little, one of the Marines said with a smirk. Todd chuckled nervously. Point is, you did good. Meals on the house for everyone at this table. Casey nodded her thanks, though she knew the Marines had already covered it. Still, it felt like the diner itself was shifting, like the walls were absorbing this moment, storing it for the next time someone needed reminding about respect. The men at the counter had gone quiet. The first one eventually muttered something about having to get to work, leaving a crumpled bill on the counter before slipping out the door. The second followed without a word. Ranger, as if sensing victory, laid his head on Holt's knee and sighed. Conversation slowly returned to the room, but it was different now. Quieter, more careful. People watched their words, aware that every sentence carried weight when men like Sergeant Holt were listening. Casey brought out plates of pancakes, eggs, and bacon for the table. She didn't bother asking for orders. She just kept the coffee hot and the plates full. The Marines ate heartily, occasionally sharing quick stories between bites. At one point, the youngest Marine, probably no older than 22, asked, Holt, sir, why didn't you say anything when they started in on you? Holt shrugged. You fight the battles that matter. This one wasn't mine to fight. But I'll tell you. He glanced at Casey. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness are the loudest ways to fight. The captain raised his mug toward her, to the waitress, who had more spine than half the room. The rest of the table echoed, Here, here. Casey felt her cheeks warm, but she smiled. I was just doing my job. No, Holt said gently, you were doing your duty. There's a difference. For the next 20 minutes, they ate, laughed, and swapped stories, some lighthearted, some heavy with memory. Casey learned Holt had been in the Army for 25 years, deployed 6 times, and that Ranger had been with him since his final tour. By the time the plates were cleared, the cafe had filled with a quiet, almost reverent atmosphere. People moved slower, voices stayed low, and when the Marines stood to leave, several patrons rose from their seats, not because they had to, but because something in them knew it was right. As the group walked out, the captain turned back to Casey. Ma'am, you ever need anything in this town, you let us know. We take care of our own. Holt followed, Ranger at his side. But just before he stepped through the door, he paused. His hand rested briefly on her shoulder. Firm, steady, grateful. You gave him a meal, Holt said quietly. But you gave me something I missed for a long time, the feeling that we're still seen. And then he was gone, leaving Casey standing in the middle of Mel's diner with the faint scent of coffee, bacon, and something else, pride. She didn't know it yet, but word of what happened that morning would spread far beyond that little cafe. And for some people in town, the next time they saw a veteran or his dog, they'd think twice before speaking, and maybe even open their wallet instead. That night, long after the diner had closed and the dishes were stacked neatly in the back, Casey couldn't shake the image of Sergeant Holt. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, replaying the way he'd spoken, steady, modest, almost like he didn't think what he'd done mattered much anymore. But his eyes, those told a different story. Somewhere out there, Holt was probably settling into another quiet night. Ranger curled up beside him, and Casey wondered what he'd seen, what it took to carve that kind of quiet dignity into a man's bones. For Holt, sleep came slow and uneasy. He learned to live with that, the strange half dreams, half memories that came for him in the dark, and as the clock's red digits crept past midnight, his mind wandered back to a different world. The air was thick with dust, the kind that coated your teeth and clung to your skin no matter how many times you wiped it away. Afghanistan, 2011. The Helmand Province. Sergeant First Class Daniel Holt crouched behind the remnants of a mud wall, scanning the open ground ahead. The sun was brutal, the heat radiating off the earth like waves. Ranger was at his side, panting lightly but focused, ears swiveling for every sound. Unit 2, this is Alpha. Holt said into the radio, no visual on the contact. Moving forward with caution, the voice crackled back. Copy that, Alpha. Keep your eyes open. They've been moving through the village for hours, sweeping for insurgent activity. When the first shots rang out, Holt's team had taken cover, returning fire. But the enemy had melted back into the maze of alleys. Now it was quiet, too. Quiet. Ranger suddenly stiffened, nose lifting toward the wind. Holt followed his gaze toward a pile of rubble about 50 yards ahead. His gut tightened. Something's off, Holt muttered. He gave a hand signal to Corporal Mendez, the youngest in the squad. Hold position. I'm taking Ranger in. Mendez frowned. You sure, Sarge? Holt nodded. Don's telling me. Something. I trust him. They moved forward, slow and low. Ranger's pace changed, no longer casual, but deliberate, calculated. Every step was placed like a chess move. 10 feet from the rubble, Ranger froze and gave a short, sharp bark. Holt's eyes darted down, and there it was, a barely visible wire running from the debris into the dusty ground. Holt's voice cut through the air. The squad scattered, taking cover. Holt knelt, assessing the situation. The wire led deeper into the rubble, a pressure plate, most likely. One wrong move and the whole area would light up. Before Holt could decide the next step, gunfire erupted from the rooftops. The enemy had been waiting, using the IED as bait. Bullets kicked up dust around them. Holt dropped flat, returning fire. With short, controlled bursts, Mendez, flank left, Collins, smoke grenades now, but in the chaos. One of the rounds struck close, too close. Mendez was down, pinned behind a broken cart with no clear path out. Ranger didn't hesitate. Before Holt could stop him, the dog broke cover, sprinting through the gunfire toward Mendez. Holt's heart slammed in his chest. Ranger, back, he yelled, but it was no use. The shepherd reached Mendez, nudging and pulling him by his vest straps, dragging him toward the nearest bit of cover. Bullets cracked overhead, chunks of mud wall exploding around them. Holt laid down, suppressing fire, shouting to the others, cover the dog, move, move, move under a storm of gunfire. Ranger pulled Mendez clear. Holt rushed in, grabbing Mendez under one arm, Ranger guarding his flank, teeth bared, rolling at every shadow. They fell back behind the wall, breaths ragged. Holt slapped the radio. We've got a casualty, requesting medevac, and mark this. Grid, we've got an active device in the open. Ranger didn't relax until Mendez was loaded onto the chopper 20 minutes later. Even then, the dog paced, restless, as though expecting another wave. Later that night, as they sat around the dim light of the forward operating base, Holt ran a hand over Ranger's head. You're out of your damn mind, he muttered, but his voice was thick with pride. The captain walked by and stopped. That dog just saved one of ours. Sarge, you realize that? Holt gave a slow nod. Yeah, I realize it. It wasn't the first time Ranger had done it, and it wouldn't be the last. The dream faded, replaced by the quiet of Holt's small rented room in the present day. Ranger lay at the foot of the bed, snoring softly. Holt sat up, rubbing his face. The memories never came in order. They were fragments, stitched together by smells, sounds, and the sudden spike of adrenaline in the middle of the night. But they were always vivid enough to remind him why he lived the way he did. He didn't need parades. He didn't want speeches. But he knew the value of people like Casey, the ones who saw beyond the uniform, beyond the years, and recognized the bond between him and the dog who had bled for the same flag. Holt glanced at Ranger. The dog's ears twitched even in sleep, always listening. Still got my back, huh? Holt whispered. Ranger didn't move, but Holt swore he saw the corner of the shepherd's mouth curl in a way that almost looked like a smile. In the dark, Holt thought of the cafe again, the voices mocking, the heat in his chest, the sudden weight of silence when the Marines walked in. He hadn't wanted a scene. But maybe it was better that way. Maybe the town needed to see it, hear it, feel. The line between disrespect and honor. Some battles were fought in the sand. Others were fought over a cup of coffee. And sometimes, he thought, the right allies showed up when you least expected them. 3 days had passed since the scene at Mel's Diner. But in a town that size, 3 hours would have been enough for the story to reach every porch swing, feed store, and church potluck. Casey noticed it the moment she walked in for her morning shift. People were different. An older man she didn't recognize stopped her by the door. "You're the waitress, right? The one who helped that veteran?" She hesitated. I guess so." He pressed a folded 20 into her palm. "That's for the dog. Buy him something good." Then he tipped his cap and left before she could even say thank you. By the time she tied her apron, Todd was waiting. His usual morning grumble was gone. Instead, he handed her a stack of envelopes. "These came in since yesterday. Folks dropping them off, asking me to pass them to you." Casey set them down, curiosity tugging at her. But the breakfast rush pulled her away. Every table seemed to have something to say. One couple told her their son was stationed overseas. Another man shared that his father had been in Korea and came home to less welcome than a stray dog. It wasn't just polite chatter. It felt personal, as though Holt's quiet presence had cracked something open in people. Around mid-morning, the bell over the door jingled, and in walked Sergeant Holt, Ranger at his side. He wasn't in uniform, just a worn flannel shirt and jeans, but something about him still carried that same air of command. Ranger, as always, scanned the room first, then eased into a heel position beside Holt's leg. Casey smiled back for more toast. Holt's eyes twinkled faintly, something like that. "Mind if I sit in your section?" She led him to the same corner booth as she poured his coffee. Holt set a brown paper bag on the table. "This is for you," he said. Casey frowned. "What is it?" He nudged it toward her. "Open it." Inside was a small framed photograph. In it, a much younger Holt knelt in dusty fatigues, one arm slung around a lean, sharp-eyed Ranger in full combat harness. The background was pure Afghanistan, low sun, endless sand, and the faint outline of armored vehicles. "Taken the week before we came home," Holt said quietly. "He'd already saved more lives than I can count. Figured you should see who you bought breakfast for." Casey traced the frame with her fingers. "You didn't have to give me this, neither, did you?" "That morning," Holt replied. "Fair trade, I think." She sat down across from him, ignoring Todd's side eye from the counter. "Holt, why didn't you say anything when those guys started in on you?" He took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "Because I've learned not every fight needs my fists or my voice. Sometimes the best thing you can do is wait. Let the right person speak up." Casey tilted her head. "And you thought I was the right person?" "I knew it the second you bent down with that plate," he said, his voice firm but warm. "Kindness isn't just a soft thing. It's courage without a rifle." Before Casey could respond, the bell jingled again, and in walked the captain from that day, still in uniform. Behind him trailed the other Marines she recognized from the cafe. "Morning, Sergeant." The captain greeted Holt with a handshake that turned into a brief, brotherly shoulder clasp. "Captain," Holt nodded. "To what do we owe the honor?" The captain glanced at Casey. "Thought you both should know. The story has made its way to the base. Got young Marines talking about it. We've got a fundraiser going to help cover costs for veterans with service animals in the county. It's already past $5,000. Casey blinked. "All because of that day." The captain shrugged. "Sometimes it just takes one spark. People saw a waitress stand up for a man and his dog. That travels." Holt's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Guess we did some good without even trying." The Marines stayed for coffee, sharing quieter stories now, not the battle tales, but the ones about homecomings, families, and the strange weight of returning to a place that's stayed the same while you've changed completely. Casey listened, learning things no textbook could teach her. How brothers in arms could go months without speaking and pick up like it was yesterday. How the chain of command didn't end when the uniforms came off, and how every deployment left invisible medals and scars alike. Eventually, the captain stood, adjusting his cover. "We've got to get back, but, Sergeant," he paused, looking Holt in the eye. "You should come to the base this weekend. There's someone who's been asking about you." Holt raised a brow. "Who?" The captain just smiled. "You'll see." When they left, the diner felt lighter somehow, the kind of light that lingers. After a storm breaks, Holt finished his coffee in silence, Ranger resting his chin on the edge of the table. As Casey cleared his plate, Holt stood and rested a hand on her shoulder. "You probably think you just fed a dog," he said, "but you reminded a whole town what respect looks like." Casey opened her mouth to respond, but he was already heading toward the door. Ranger paused to glance back at her, just once, before following his partner out into the bright morning. Across town, the two men from the counter, the Mockers, sat in a hardware store parking lot, sharing an awkward silence. One of them finally muttered, "Think we went too far that day." The other stared at the steering wheel. "Yeah, I've been thinking about it since. My old man served in Desert Storm. I don't know what the hell got into me." Neither said much more, but in the weeks to come, both of them would quietly leave donations at the cafe, not for credit, just to square something in their own minds. By the time Casey's shift ended, the paper bag with the photograph was tucked safely in her purse. She didn't know exactly why, but she felt changed, not in a big, dramatic way, more like a subtle recalibration. Maybe it was Holt's words. Maybe it was the way the Marines had looked at him. Or maybe it was the realization that the smallest, simplest choices could ripple out in ways you'd never see coming. As she walked home under the fading light, she passed the VFW hall. The door was open, and inside she saw Holt at a table with a few other veterans, Ranger lying content at his feet. They were laughing, the kind of laughter that comes from shared history and scars you've all survived to tell about. Casey paused, smiling to herself before continuing down the sidewalk. Somewhere, deep down, she knew she'd see him again. And the next time she did, she'd have something better than scrambled eggs and bacon for Ranger. She'd have a story of her own. The weekend came faster than Holt expected. Saturday morning, the sun had barely crested the horizon when he laced up his boots, not the heavy combat kind, just sturdy leather ones that had molded to his feet over years of wear. Ranger waited by the door, tail thumping, already sensing this wasn't an ordinary walk into town. The drive to the Marine base took 40 minutes. Holt didn't say much along the way, his eyes fixed on the road, but his mind was alive with guesses. The captain had been vague. Someone asking about you, which could mean anything in his world. When they reached the gate, the young lance corporal on duty snapped to attention. "Morning, Sergeant Holt. We've been expecting you." Holt gave him a nod and drove on, the sound of Ranger's claws clicking against the back seat floor. The base was alive with weekend drills, formations moving across the parade ground, the metallic clang of gear being loaded into trucks they parked near the admin building. The captain was waiting, dressed blue sharp as a blade, that same measured smile on his face. "Glad you came," he said, shaking Holt's hand. "Follow me." Ranger 2. They walked across the asphalt, boots echoing, until they reached a hangar on the far side. Inside, the air smelled faintly of oil and dust, sunlight slanting through high windows. And there, standing near the back, was a woman in her late 40s, wearing civilian clothes, but carrying herself like someone who'd once known the uniforms. "Wait." The moment Holt saw her, the years fell away. "Dan," she said, voice breaking just slightly. He froze. "Angela." She smiled, and it wasn't the casual, polite smile of strangers. It was the raw, unguarded relief of someone finding a missing piece of themselves. Holt stepped forward slowly, as though afraid she might vanish if he moved fast. "It's been 20 years, he said softly. Angela shook her head. "More like 22. Since Bosnia." Casey, who had been invited by the captain to witness this moment, stood a few feet back with a knot in her throat. She didn't know the details yet, but she could feel the weight between them. Angela reached out, resting her hand against Ranger's head. "You got yourself a new partner." Holt nodded. "Saved my life more times than I can count. Kinda like someone else I know." Angela laughed quietly. "You never were good at taking credit. Back in Bosnia, I just pulled you behind that wall. You're the one who kept the rest of us from panicking." The captain cleared his throat. "Sergeant Holt, Angela is here because she wanted to thank you. She's been working with the VA, helping coordinate programs for vets with service animals." When she heard what happened at the diner, she recognized the name immediately. Angela's eyes softened. "Dan, I've been telling your story for years, about the day you wouldn't leave until every last one of us was accounted for. I just never thought I'd get to tell it to your face again." They sat at a folding table near the hangar doors, the smell of warm asphalt drifting in. Ranger lay at Holt's boots, watching the world with that same alert patience. Casey listened quietly as Angela and Holt traded stories. The kind that started in one war zone and somehow meandered through 3 others before ending with a joke about bad chow. She learned that Angela had been a combat medic, that she patched Holt up more than once, and that they lost touch after she left the service to raise her son. After an hour, Angela reached into her bag and pulled out a faded green patch, the insignia of their old uni. "I kept this," she said, sliding it across the table. "Figured you should have it. You earned it more than I did." Holt turned it over in his hands, thumb tracing the stitching. "We both earned it," he said quietly. The captain stood, giving them a moment of privacy. Casey followed him outside, the sound of distant marching filling the air. "You see why I wanted you here?" the captain asked her. That diner moment was just the surface. People like Holt, they're the thread holding a lot of us together. But they don't talk about it. Not unless someone else tells the story for them. Casey nodded, understanding. More now than she had 3 days ago. "I'm glad I came." Inside, Holt and Angela stood, shaking hands one last time. There was no big, tearful goodbye, just the quiet, mutual respect of 2 people who'd been to the same hell and walked back out. As Holt headed toward the door, Angela called after him. "Don't be a stranger this time, Dan." He gave her that same fake smile Casey had seen before. "I won't." On the way back into town, Holt stopped at the edge of a ridge that overlooked the valley. The sun was lowering, painting the fields gold. Ranger sat beside him, ears twitching in the breeze. Casey, riding in the passenger seat because Holt had offered her a ride back, broke the silence. "She's important to you, isn't she?" Holt kept his eyes on the horizon. "We've both seen the same things. That doesn't go away. Doesn't matter how much time passes." Ranger nudged his hand, and Holt scratched behind his ears. "Guess it's the same with this guy. Once you've trusted someone with your life, you don't forget it." Casey smiled faintly. "That's what the captain meant about the thread." Holt nodded. "Threads hold things together, but they can break if you don't look after them." They drove the rest of the way in comfortable quiet, the kind that comes from shared understanding. When Holt dropped Casey off, she hesitated before stepping out. "Hey, next time you and Ranger are at the diner, first round of eggs is on me. Non-negotiable." Holt gave a slow nod. "Well, hold you to it." Ranger barked once, as if sealing the deal, and as the truck pulled away, Casey realized something. She hadn't just met a veteran. She'd met a man who still fought battles, not with weapons, but with the steady, quiet way he lived. And in her own small way, she'd been drafted into that fight too. Some stories don't end when the scene is over. That morning at Mel's Diner could have been just another day. A veteran eats in silence, a waitress goes home after her shift, and the world moves on. But that's not what happened, because kindness has a way of echoing far beyond the moment. The Marines who walked into that cafe didn't just defend a man and his dog. They reminded the town what respect looks like, and the people who witnessed it carried that memory with them. Days later, donations were flowing in for veterans with service animals. Strangers were buying meals for people they'd never spoken to, and those who once mocked, they stayed quiet, maybe thinking about their own fathers, brothers, or friends who'd worn a uniform. Sergeant Holt didn't ask for attention. He didn't want a spotlight. But sometimes, it's the quietest people who hold the strongest lessons. So the next time you see someone in uniform, or someone who once wore one, remember this story. Look past the years, past the silence, and see the life they've lived. Because respect isn't about big speeches or grand gestures. Sometimes it's as simple as a plate of eggs, a loyal dog, and the courage to do the right thing, even when no one else will.